Welcome to the Story A Day podcast. This is Julie Duffy from storyaday.org, encouraging you to be a writer every day, not someday. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Julie from the Story A Day podcast here. And today, like the rest of the writing world, I want to talk about Brandon Sanderson's amazing Kickstarter project. When I last looked at it, it was up to 20 million, but at the rate that it was going, he could well be at 40 million by tomorrow, or maybe it'll have slowed down, who knows. But there's a couple of things I want to talk to you about this, because we're so easily influenced by other people's ability to tell us what we ought to be doing, and to see somebody with having this specific mind-blowing success could be affecting you in negative ways. Now, there's a contemporary of Brandon Sanderson's, a science fiction writer called John Scalzi, who has written a really good blog post at his website, which I'll link to in the notes. He talks about exactly why the business side of this has gone the way it has, and why even he, who is successful and award-winning and has a great big following, wouldn't be able to do what Brandon Sanderson has done, because Brandon Sanderson has been building his empire for the past 15 years. He's not just an author, a guy who writes. He's also a guy who runs cruises, who runs a podcast, who does merch, who does swag. And he has a whole machine in place for getting that to his fans. He said, if you haven't watched the Kickstarter video, highly recommend it. It's a great example of storytelling and marketing. There's suspense, there's open loops, there's all kinds of masterful storytelling going on there in that video where he announces what he's doing. But he's also built a reputation as someone who can put together an experience for fans and deliver. He talks in that video about how he's been traveling so much that when the pandemic came along, he got all this time back. And he used that time to write. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because one of the things that struck me was that he has been doing this for so long that he has put in place the systems that allowed him to write. Once he got this extra space and time in his life, he just applied the systems that he uses on his writing days to more days of the year. And because there was nothing on the calendar for those days, he was able to work on fun projects. Now, you and I have probably not been working at the pace that he's been working at. We possibly don't have systems in place to make sure that we're getting 4 hours, 5 hours, 8 hours writing in on writing days. We probably don't have the stamina to do that yet. So if you've been beating yourself up for not writing that pandemic novel that everybody was going to write, remember that you're going from zero. He was going from 60 miles an hour up. He has the systems in place to get himself through the messy middle because he's done it so many times before. He has a network of writing friends already in place who will read his stuff and give him comments on it. He has spent 15 years engaging with the audience, engaging with the community. He's got a lot of foundations in place. These are things that we can start working on at any time. So consider, do you have any of those things in place? And importantly, consider that unlike Brandon Sanderson, the pandemic might have had a very different effect on your life. It may not have opened up all this space. Sure, you weren't commuting anymore, but it's entirely possible that instead of commuting, you were now responsible for supervising virtual school in the best case scenario and absolutely homeschooling your child even though you didn't want to in the more common scenario, I think. It's possible that you were now all of a sudden responsible for really making sure that your elderly parent got all of their prescriptions and figured out how to talk to their doctor over Zoom and figured out how not to be isolated. You yourself, if you were living alone, might have been adjusting to getting your human fix every day at the office or at a club or at a coffee shop or at a church or charity group that you're part of, to all of a sudden not having any of that. It's entirely possible that what that break gave back to Brandon Sanderson, it took away from you. So there's lots of reasons why you shouldn't feel bad that you haven't done a $20 million Kickstarter yet. And why you shouldn't feel bad that you haven't written 4 novels over the past 2 years. And why you can't put together swag boxes that everybody wants. And more importantly, you might not want to do any of those things. You might not want to be the kind of writer who has to turn in a manuscript every year, regardless of whether you think it's any good or not, because you've got a contract that says you have to do it. I've had friends in that situation and they hated it and they got out of it. That might not be why you're in this. You might want to get to that stage one day, or you might simply want a writing practice that allows you to sit on your back deck, in your back garden, listen to a bird sing, and do the writing that makes your heart feel like that bird. And that's okay. Wherever you are on that spectrum, from writing in your back garden to planning world domination one day, it's fine to be where you are right now. I always implore people to make sure that the goals that they have for themselves are goals that they have made for themselves, not goals that have anything to do with what people in the outside world think a writer should do. Writing looks different for everybody. You don't need to professionalize any kind of artistic practice. I was talking to a friend who's a psychologist the other day, and she said maybe, psychology is great, but a lot of people could do with an artistic practice, whether it's writing or knitting or art or whittling, having something that you do every day, or yoga, whatever it is, a practice that brings you to yourself. You and I were fans of writing. I think you and I know that writing is that thing that brings us most closely to the version of ourselves we want to be. But to build that practice, I've been going on about this for a couple of years now. I think there's a structure that underlies a successful writing practice. And I gave it this acronym, iWriter. And as I was looking at and analysing Brandon Sanderson's success, I was quite pleased to see that this framework that I talk about holds up. Because underneath everything that he did, he had the imagination to go out and do this. He had the writing practice to sit down and get the words on the page. He refined his practice, right? He didn't just say, oh, well, I'm not traveling anymore. Maybe I'll hop on Zoom and do lots of virtual events. He was like, oh, well, maybe that's not the best use of my time. And he refined his practice and gave himself more writing time. You have to improve. He had a first reader. I know he has more than one first reader, but for this project, he had his wife. She was his first reader. And he took her feedback and he listened to her questions. And then presumably the next pages were improved by having got that. He engaged, in this case, with the one first reader, but he also knew how to create engaging characters. He's celebrating his triumph. I mean, he kept it quiet for a long time, but now, boom, big celebration. And he repeated what he does. We need these systems in our lives as well. We need the imagination both to come up with the story sparks and to develop them, but we also need the imagination to see ourselves as writers right where we are today, and to imagine where we want to be and work towards it, putting systems in place to support that. And maybe you are where you want to be. Maybe you're really happy with the way that you're writing now, and you just want to make sure that your writing itself gets better. Awesome. So we need the imagination for that. We need to actually move out of the realm of imagination and put the words on the page. We need to write. And then we need to refine our practices, refine our ideas about a project. We need to refine our practice of what pen we use, what computer we use, where our desk is, anything that's not working for you, anything that's holding you back. You need to be willing to look at that and tweak it. Then the middle eye of the iWriter framework is improve. We need to be willing to improve, and we need to have systems in place for that. Don't be afraid of revision. Find people who will give you feedback, and we need to improve our practices too. If you're only writing when you're inspired and you wish you were writing more, you need to improve your practice of getting to the desk. There's a lot of humility in all of this writing business. We just have to and I think it's great because as writers, we're curious people, right? We're lifelong learners. We're always looking to improve. So this framework is a way of helping you pick which bit you're going to focus on. If you don't have a system in place for celebrating your triumphs, and by triumph, I mean everything from getting to the desk to getting your $20 million on Kickstarter. If you don't have celebrations built into every step of your process, then it's harder to keep the habit going. It's behavioral science, solidly studied. Put a little celebration in place to modify your behavior, to make sure that you reinforce all of the good behavior. Think of your inner writer as a little puppy. We ignore the bad behavior, we reinforce the good behavior. The E of the writer framework is engagement, engaging with the community, engaging with other writers. I'm leading a group through the iWriter course at the moment, and I'm just seeing after a few meetings how much it means to these people to be creating a writing practice or refining their work or trying to improve their skills, and to be able to turn up and just spend an hour with other people who get it. And they might have good advice for them, or they might have an insightful question for them. And just the act of turning up for that call says to their subconscious, I'm a writer. This practice is important to me. So don't underestimate the importance of engaging with writers, readers. Of course, other writers are always other readers, and engaging sort of generally with the history that you're in. So read short stories if you want to write stories. And then the R of the iWriter framework is the idea of repeat. You need to build systems that allow you to repeat the things that are working. Brandon Sanderson has been writing on contract for years and years and years. He's got to have systems for going from brainstorming a novel to fleshing out a draft, to creating the final draft, to getting the swag together, to going on tour. I mean, everything he's done, we don't tend to be Harper Lee. In this day and age, you don't tend to be successful by writing one thing. If a pro career is what you're looking for, you're going to have systems to repeat. If a practice is what you're looking for that grounds you in your daily life, you are going to need a practice. You need to have a way of being, of getting to the page. I think this is one of the reasons that Julia Cameron's morning pages took off so much, because this idea of sitting down out every morning and just getting your thoughts on the page is so powerful and so grounding. And of course, if you're a writer, it's flexing the muscles, it's your warm-up. And it doesn't have to be every day. It has to be what works for you if it's going to be a practice. And that practice has to be what works for you. And the only way you can find that out is by practicing and trying things and tweaking and changing. Never think that you have to follow everything that somebody else tells you about writing. I've met a lot of people who've been hung up on the fact that Stephen King writes 2,000 words a day, and if he can write 2,000 words a day and I'm not writing 2,000 words a day, then obviously I'm a failure. Now I'm worried that there's going to be a lot of people who are hung up on the fact that Brandon Sanderson wrote 4 novels over the pandemic, in his spare time, and launched them with a Kickstarter that broke all records. And therefore, if they're not doing that, they're not a real writer. The outliers are not the people that we measure ourselves against. In fact, we don't even need to measure ourselves against anyone. If you want to write, then write. We are now into March as I record this. You may have heard of a certain challenge called Story a Day May, which will be coming up. This year, I'm going to be introducing a new way of approaching Story a Day for the rest of us, I think, or I need to come up with a catchy title for it. But there's going to be a slightly calmer, more calmer, gentler version of Story a Day this year if you want to join us. If you've been intimidated by the frenetic idea of writing a story a day for a month, I have something for you this year. Make sure that you are on my mailing list. Come to storyaday.org and sign up in one of those boxes that pops up, and I will be sending out information. The idea is crystallizing now. I've got a good sense of how I can make this work for you. I've worked with writers for so long now, and coming through the pandemic years, I've really seen that. And working with the community for 12 years, I've seen how the sprint is fun, but the marathon or the long walk, the hike, is the thing that creates the most richness in a writing life. And I am really keen to get as many people on that path to finding their own path as I possibly can. So this year's Story a Day might be for you if you've been intimidated by it in the past. I'm really excited about the possibilities that this raises, bringing everything I've learned from working with writers over the last dozen years and shoehorning it, as much of it as I can, into what might look like a 5-day challenge rather than a 31-day challenge. And it might not look like writing a story a day. It might look like something a little more manageable, but still designed to push you enough to unlock your strengths as a writer, to unlock your belief in yourself as a writer, to set up a system for you that you can begin to build your writing practice on. Really excited about it. I hope you'll come along, follow along as I develop this, and get on the list so you can hear about upcoming thoughts as I develop this, and give me your feedback as well. That's what I have for you this week. It's been an exciting week in the world of literature. It's these big events are exciting. It's wonderful to see somebody making their living from writing. It's wonderful to see the entrepreneurial opportunities that are out there for writers. But it all starts with words on the page. Keep writing. If you want to learn to write, don't read another book or article. Start writing. I'm here to invite you to consider the Story a Day 3-day challenge. It's a challenge and a workshop that gets people writing and completing stories in just 3 days. And it works. I'm fanatical about getting more and more diverse stories into the world, and I think yours should be among them. If you're feeling the pull to write or level up your storytelling, let me hold your hand through 3 days of short story writing. Check out the 3-day challenge at storyaday.org/3DC. Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at storyaday.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime, have a great creative week, and of course, keep writing.